Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break with the Rabbi. Today is Thursday, March 11th, 2021. It is also the 27th day of Adar, getting closer to the holiday of Passover, which will begin in 2 weeks' time. As we continue our discussion about the building of the tabernacle, there's something unique that we find about this whole concept of the building of the tabernacle. Why is it? How is it that we, the human beings, should build a tabernacle for God in this physical world? Seemingly, a tabernacle, which is a physical materialistic item made out of gold and silver and all the other wonderful material, is the most physical item. How can we make and use a materialistic item and make it a place, a home, for an infinite, spiritual, selfless God? Isn't God the antithesis of materialism? The antithesis of gold, silver, and all these wonderful things? Isn't God about spiritual, infinite, not limited or confined to a certain space and time and place? So how does this whole to-do even make sense? And in fact, this week we conclude the book of Exodus. And the book of Exodus begins with the enslavement and the slavery of the Jewish people and concludes with the building of the tabernacle. And in Judaism, we know that the beginning is connected with the end and the end is connected to the beginning. And the whole entire Torah is one circle and one spectrum and one concept which intertwines with one another and has a contemporary application to everything in our life. In general, this Torah, this book of Exodus, is not only called the book of Exodus, a book of redemption. So even the part of the exile and the first two Torah readings talk about the exile of the Jewish people and the slavery and the terrible hardships they've gone through are also part of the redemption. And when we talk about the sin of the golden calf and the laws of day-to-day activities and the building of the tabernacle are all part of the redemption. How and why and what is the connection? When we talk about slavery, what is slavery? Slavery is an inhibition. Slavery is a limitation. Slavery is a misplacement. The concept of exile, and exile of Egypt was the first of all exiles, was a displacement of the Jewish people that they were not in the place where they belonged. They were, so to speak, put in a place for 210 years under very difficult conditions. And finally, the time came where they were released and redeemed. They can be free people, free to behave as they wish, who they are, where they are. But the moment they were released and redeemed, they were brought to Mount Sinai, and God tells them, "You are my servants." What kind of freedom is that? And in fact, that was the greatest freedom ever given to human beings. Not to be a slave to certain inhibitions of their own, not to be a slave to inhibitions or to quantities or qualities of what other people measure, but they are measured by a godly and divine way. What God did to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai by making them his slaves, he says, you're no longer limited to the materialistic way and narrow way of looking at things, of what is considered free. But you now have an opportunity to connect to divine. And when you connect to divine, you become free because you become infinite as well. So what God does, then he tells them to build a tabernacle. And he tells them to build a tabernacle with the most materialistic and physical items that exist in the world that people use to benefit only but themselves. But he tells them, you take that and use it as a tabernacle. Make it a holy place for God. How, you may ask? God is infinite. But because now you are a slave of Almighty, because now I have given you a divine intuition, because now whatever you do, you can fuse finite and infinite, you now have the ability to take a finite piece of gold, a finite piece of silver, and a finite piece of copper, and make it spiritual and make it holy. The Torah uses 72 verses to describe the building of the tabernacle and the construction and the making of the garments of the high priest and the priests. And then repeats it again in this week's Torah reading, not only what the Jewish people were commanded to do, but how they did it. Why does the Torah repeat it? Isn't the Torah so concise and careful with measuring its words? But as the Torah commentaries tell us, that something that God cherishes, God repeats. And because God cherishes the very fact that we, the Jewish people, are tasked with a mission of bringing godliness into the lowest of the worlds, that is the greatest beautiful thing that God can ever want for, and continues to repeat it and discuss it and mention it, and throughout the 5 books of Moses, about this unbelievable tabernacle, the task that the Jews were given to make this world a holy place. Every single one of us, as God tells Moses at the beginning and the onset of the construction of the tabernacle, we're tasked with making this world a sanctuary for God. Every single one of us has the ability to fuse physical and spiritual. But step number 1 is we need an exodus. We need a redemption. Leave our own ambitions behind. Not to look at ourselves confined or displaced, but liberated. And the ability to climb higher and higher because we are connected with the divine. Because we have infinite powers within us because of our soul. We are unstoppable. We have the power to fuse the most materialistic item and make it spiritual. To eat food, make a blessing on it and make it holy. To take wood and build a holy temple. To take money that we hard earned and donate it to charity. Taking any of those mitzvahs, what we have done, we have transformed a physical, materialistic, selfish world into a selfless, divine, spiritual, infinite God. This is the conclusion of the book of redemption. Not only that the Jewish people follow the instructions, but the details on how God enjoyed every single moment of it and continues to bring his divine presence within the Jewish people. As the conclusion of this week's Torah reading tells us and tallies all the amount that the Jewish people contributed, that they gave their heart and soul to building this tabernacle. And God then blessed them and brought the divine presence that they were able to see and feel. True redemption is when we feel spiritual. True redemption is liberation of our physical self. Liberation of not to, God forbid, expire, but liberation of the physical temptations. Liberation of the confinements of the physical confinements of the materialistic inhibitions. That is true redemption. That is the book of redemption that we read this week, that we conclude. And when do we conclude it? Right before the holiday of Passover. Right before we go into the month of Nisan, which is considered a month of miracles, a month of redemption. It is always read around this time because it's not something of the past, but it's something very much present. As we read about the Torah reading, about the Torah tells us of the building of the tabernacle, we also commemorate, according to one opinion that we had 2 days ago, the 25th of Adar, the birthday of the world. According to some opinions, some it's Rosh Hashanah, some it's by the month of Nisan. But what is the meaning of a birthday? Where God tells you, I have tasked you and only you with a mission. 25th of Adar also happens to be the Rebbe's wife's birthday. And in 1988, the Rebbe came out with a campaign to teach people and educate them about the concept of their birthdays. Before that, Jewish birthdays weren't considered something that people celebrated necessarily, as a birthday in the Torah was only mentioned by Pharaoh. But the Rebbe brought from many different Jewish sources and teaching us that a birthday is something which we contemplate and recognize that God tasked us with a mission, us and nobody else. Every single person on his birthday is God reminding them that you count, that you mean something, that I need you specifically to do the task. And when you do that task, and when you connect with the divine and realize that you are tasked with a godly mission, you can then fly above any limitation. You're no longer confined. You're no longer displaced or exiled. That's the ultimate redemption. So as we approach the month of Nisan, as we now come to this week's Torah reading, and we conclude the book of redemption, and at the conclusion of the book of redemption, as we conclude with every other holy Torah that is read in the synagogue, we wish and greet each other, Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek, be strong and be strong. Let us all be strong together. We remind each other that as a nation we stand tall by Mount Sinai, and ever since then we were tasked with a mission to make this world a godly place. Every single one of us has that mission, and every single one of us has that charge and mission. But then there's the individualized exile and redemption that we all can leave. The leaving of Exodus, the leaving of Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt wasn't just 3,300 years ago. It happens every single day in our life. As our sages tell us that every single day we have to remember as if we left Egypt that day. Because every single day we have to remember the moment we say, I can't, this is not me, I couldn't do it. We have to remind ourselves. The reason why we're alive, the reason why God put us here in this world is because he gave us a mission. He gave us a job. There's no I can't. It's a question of only how and where and when will I do it. Don't be a slave to society. Don't be a slave to your own box that you put yourself around you. Don't be a slave to your own ambitions. Remember that we all were gifted from divine, that we can connect to something superior. As God tells us, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell in you. All we need to do is collect those precious metals. Realize that they're for a holy task, and God will dwell amongst us. Realize that what we have, the talents that God has given us, the money, the materialistic, the items that we may have, are there for a God-given purpose. We can really make a difference by only realizing that we have a touch of divine within ourselves. We are connected to something greater than just we can imagine. And when we tap into these realities, we are no longer a slave or confined to anything or everything. We then can overachieve, overaccomplish, and bring about that fusion of material and physical. That time where the tabernacle was built, the divine presence's glory is shining, and we come to the ultimate satisfaction as the blessing that Moses gives the Jewish people in this week's Torah reading. V'hinoyam Hashem Elokeinu. May it be the pleasure of God that God's blessing be blessed in your hands and in the work that you do. We can work really hard, do many things in a materialistic world, and still see no success and still feel tired and upset because we don't see a blessing in the work we do. The greatest blessing that one can give, as Moses gave the Jewish people, that the work we do, the labor we put in, and the hard efforts that we achieve should be seen and should be fruitful, and the blessing of God should always be with it. My dear friends, I wish you a good Shabbos and Chazak.